Hello and welcome. I am super excited about today's topic. We are going to meet the Neurospicy Crone. If that sounds intriguing to you, then stick around for the video. Hello and welcome. My name is Mira, the Neurospicy Crone, coming out for the first time officially in this video. So let's define some terms. You've probably heard these terms in different ways before, but what I really want to do in this video is talk about how if you're a woman who's been alive for many decades, you grew up in a world that did not understand neurodiversity and also has a pretty negative connotation around aging, and I am here to flip the script on that. So let's define some terms. First of all, neuro, we all know that means the nervous system, including our beautiful brains. And neurobiology or neurology or all that neuro has to do with how our nervous system functions, the nervous system itself. Great. So there's a term called neurodiversity. Have you heard it? It was coined in the late 90s, like 1998. Not that long ago, about 25, 26 years ago, 27 years ago, by a woman in Australia, a sociologist, and she was looking at the way different human brains function and the way the nervous system perceives and receives and emits experiences in the world as diverse, like biodiversity. So the term comes from biodiversity, where we know in the natural environment, the more diverse the plants and animals are in an ecosystem, the more stable and healthy that ecosystem is. Biodiversity is a very good thing. It's a very important thing for a healthy environment. And what she was saying, Judy Singer was her name, is that neurodiversity is equally important for a stable culture. So in the past, differences in processing or brain function, neurological behaviors and traits was often pathologized. And there's kind of a dark history to that I'm going to get into, but she was kind of reclaiming this. So neurodiversity is a way to talk about what previously had been talked about as disorders or dysfunction or abnormalities, as simply recognizing that people are different, people's way of perceiving the world and processing the world and the kind of behaviors that we emit in response to that perceiving and processing is beautiful and diverse, like a healthy ecosystem. So the history of Western psychology, here we go. We just need to recognize the past so we can move forward into the future free. So the American Psychological Association is from like the late 1800s. Guess who was made up of this association? Older white men. Not to say that there's anything wrong with older white men, but this association lacked any diversity of any kind. So it wasn't a full representation of the human experience. It was a representation of older white men, educated, wealthy white men. So everything in psychology is based on their experience and their perspective, their orientation. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just not inclusive. It leaves out people. It leaves out older women. It leaves out people of color. It leaves out people with different ways of processing as quote unquote normal. So this association in the 1950s created a diagnostic and statistic manual. Don't get me started. I'm going to go into a rant, but basically, they decided it was a good idea to take human behavior and classify it and give people a diagnosis of a disorder or a dysfunction or a dis-ease. And so those are the kinds of psychological diagnoses we're familiar with today. ADHD, autism, and guess what? You might not know this, but homosexuality was listed as a psychological disorder in this diagnostic and statistic manual until the 70s. And there was a variation on this that actually existed until 1987, if you can believe that. Shocking, I know, but the reason I'm talking about it is to help us understand that this group of people who have set forth for all of humanity what they think is normal, what they think is healthy, what they think is not normal or dysfunctional, is just a sliver of a perspective. But it's the dominant culture. The dominant culture are these people of privilege, these people who had the wealth, created the rules. They got to determine what's normal, right? And so when we understand that, we can start to say, yeah, no, thank you. I don't need to be boxed in that way. I don't need to be caged in by your definition of what it means to be a human, having this beautiful experience on life. So that's the history of these psychological diagnoses. And then in the late 1990s, 1998, this woman was like, wait a minute, this isn't a dysfunction. This is simply a unique aspect of the human experience. So it's a temperament. It's the way my nervous system functions. To be neurodiverse means that maybe when I walk into a room, the bright lights make such an impact on my nervous system that I need to make accommodations for myself, which might include leaving that room. It could be a sound or a smell makes such an impact on my nervous system that I get flooded, where it's just too much and I can't, like my cup is full, I can't experience anymore without becoming extremely agitated. Or when you think about the stress response, which is a response to an impact, being overwhelmed in some way, you might fight, you might get bitchy or cranky, you might flee, like I'm out of here, that's my MO. Or you might freeze. You just become completely overwhelmed and like a deer in the headlights. So those are all natural responses to your nervous system is taking care of us. It's like, okay, we need to respond to this situation. So there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. It's just a difference. It's a diversity. So neurodiverse is a pretty modern term, and it's a liberating term. It's saying no to the patriarchy. It's saying no to the dominant culture. You will not find this term in the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistic Manual. It's not a term of the culture of like, we're telling you what's wrong with you. It's a self-described word. I get to choose if I feel like I have a neurodivergence. Of course, you can use professional support to help you for self-understanding. There's ways that you can, understand yourself and also take ownership of your experience and your identity. So that's neurodiverse. Neurospicy is just kind of a fun way to even further remove ourselves from these heavy books, these diagnostic manuals that tell us who we are and how we are and our place in society. So neurospicy is not an official or professional term in any way. It's just a fun way to say like, hey, you know what? I experienced the word a little bit differently. And I grew up thinking there was something wrong with me. I grew up being shamed for being weird or being different or sitting alone in lunch in 7th grade. We can talk about that. And so neurospicy is just like a liberating term. It's an emancipation term. It's saying, I get to decide how I define my neural processing, my temperament, and how my nervous system works. And a lot of people are embracing this term, especially younger people. A lot of younger people are saying, oh, I'm neurodiverse, I'm neurospicy. But for women who grew up in the 60s, when there was still institutions, mental institutions, asylums, where women were actually committed for being too independent, too strong-headed, they would actually get committed to a mental institution. Like, we grew up in that era. 60s, 70s, 80s, right? We still weren't really understanding this. And here's another really important factor that the Neurospicy Crone wants everyone to know is that we weren't included in any of the research or treatment. I myself went to Washburn Child Guidance Center when I was in 2nd grade because there was something going on. Something's going on with this girl. We don't know what. So I went to this child guidance center. I never got a diagnosis and I never got a treatment plan or she needs these accommodations when she's in the classroom. So I was that girl who got kicked out all the time for talking too much. So there's me sitting out in the hall, not in the classroom, learning and participating and socializing. I was sitting out in the hall because they're like, oh my gosh, I don't know what to do with you. Out in the hall you go. So for me, excessive talking was like a self-stim. It was a way to regulate my nervous system because I didn't have any understanding and I didn't have any other tools. So how does that feel for you? Was there something in your life when you were growing up in this era where you were just made to feel like, oh my gosh, what's wrong with me? Or you're like, I don't know why this doesn't work for me. Like I have a really hard time socializing. I would just be alone. I was just spent so much of my life alone because socializing was so hard. I couldn't figure it out. And when I did hang out, I usually hung out with guys because guys are like really basic. They're like, oh, whatever, let's hang out, Whereas with other girls and other women, it's so complicated. I'm like, I don't get what's going on. So to understand that is incredibly empowering to be like, oh, okay, that's how my nervous system works. I am neurodiverse. I have a different way of looking at things. So the crone comes in where we're also reclaiming aging. So we're reclaiming our unique way of processing the world through neurodiversity and neurospicy, and we're also reclaiming aging. Do you know the root word of crone? Have you heard this word? It's kind of, people aren't too familiar with it now because it's kind of a bad word. It actually comes from the word carrion, like a rotting carcass. Like, oh, you're an old woman, you're basically a rotting carcass. Today, on the internet right now, you can find the definition of the word crone as ugly old woman. But actually, subjective practices, spiritual traditions are pulling that word forward and reclaiming it and saying, no, crone actually relates to la corona, which means the crown, to be wearing the crown of wisdom. I have reached a certain place on the path of the human experience where I know what's going on. I've experienced so much. I've met so many people. I've traveled so far. There's a lot of value in that. And the dominant culture, who was obsessed with youth and beauty, doesn't really have a place for an experienced woman who's wearing the crown of wisdom. And so again, taking that word and flipping it and reclaiming it and saying, oh, I'm a neurospicy crone. I am someone who has a different way of being in the world that's okay and works for me when I understand myself and know how to regulate my nervous system and know how to move in the world in a way that doesn't feel like a jackhammer on my nervous system. And I'm aging, and that's a positive. That's a good thing. It's beautiful to be alive for this many decades. It's beautiful to look ahead to perhaps many more decades, and that I have something of value to contribute, that I have worth, and that my beauty is in my little sagginess and my little wrinkles and the dryness and whatever happens as we move through life. All of nature goes through a process. And each stage of that process is beautiful and right and perfect. And so the crone is reclaiming that phase of aging. You may have heard of the triple goddess, where it's the maiden, who is the young woman, the mother, who's in that mothering age, that might be your professional career time, and then the crone, or the mystic, the wise old woman. And I'm going to throw in a fourth stage because longevity has made the stage from the mother, to the end of life is decades and decades and decades, right? So the queen, right? So, or the matriarch. So the maiden, you're just learning, you're just figuring things out, and this is what our society is obsessed with, is this young girl who really doesn't have much experience yet, but ooh, she's pretty, right? Of course, we want to honor our younger sisters, but to recognize that our whole society is obsessed with this age range. And then the mother is like the workhorse. It's like you're getting everything done. And then the matriarch is where you have your children, you have your grandchildren, you are established in life. And then the crone, or the mystic, is that age where you're really deep into your wisdom. You're really connected with your intuition. You really have a deep sense of knowing. So it's a very spiritual time of life where you start to really be more creative or get back to your creativity that you may have lost during that mothering stage or whatever that was. And so the crone is a place of power. And so introducing the Neurospicy Crone, and how does that feel for you? What parts of that fit for you? What parts of that do you have questions about where you're like, what is it for me? And so if you are, 50 plus, you might not even know that you're neurodiverse. I mean, of course, you're like, oh God, I have to have my sweaters. Like I was putting something on today. I'm like, too heavy, too light. I'm like, it has to have the right weight or I'm not comfortable. So you know that about yourself, of course, your whole life, but to have a better framework for it and to understand that it's a temperament of your nervous system. And once you understand that, you can really start to understand how to learn to regulate your nervous system. And there's a beautiful process for this that comes from the yoga tradition. So as a yoga therapist, I've been able to really have self-regulation as a part of my daily lifestyle. And so I just started something I'm super excited about. It's called the Crone's Nest. And it's an online community where we can gather and really reframe and reclaim our whole life of living without any research to support our experience, without any practices given to us. We're just kind of pushed aside from our neurodiversity and now pushed aside again through aging, and to reclaim all of that and to create a sisterhood where we are learning self-regulation. We're studying neurodiversity. We're studying the feminine divine so that we can tap into that innate spirituality in whatever construct that makes sense for you. So if that sounds like something of interest to you, I would love to have you join. It's brand new. We're just getting started. And if you have any questions about this, just start to look into it for yourself. There's a wonderful book called Divergent Minds by Janara Nurnberg, and I'll share that in the link below too in the description. And I'll also share a link to the Crone's Nest. And if you want to claim this title, Neurospicy Crone, or any aspect of that, I invite you to do that. If you want to type that in the comments, I'm a Neurospicy Crone, or whatever part of that feels true for you. And it's really, as our society is literally crumbling away, there's no doubt that the patriarchy, the dominant culture is falling apart. What's going to emerge? What is going to emerge? And I say it's this feminine wisdom. And so if that sounds like something that you want to be a part of, please stay connected, subscribe to the channel, check out the Crone's Nest, and thank you so much for being here.